I want a PlayStation 5 Pro, but the world keeps telling me not to get one. The most recent development being that the games themselves are getting worse.
Scott, you know, the last time we spoke, we were debating whether the PlayStation 5 Pro was worth its price point. Well, yes. Since then, I have bought one. I have bought a PlayStation 5 Pro, and I have been testing it out. Admittedly, not for full price. If you are a listener, of the What Culture gaming podcast, can't even say the name of my own podcast, but if you have been listening to that, you'll have heard me bang on about this for the past week. But one thing we haven't covered is the fact that a lot of the PS5 Pro patches have been a little bit disappointing, and annoyingly, they are covering some of the games that I have been most wanting to play, and in some ways, the games that I bought a PlayStation 5 Pro for. Some of the big offenders, and most of this stuff is taken either from first-hand accounts from people like Reddit, but Digital Foundry have been releasing a bunch of deep dives into the PS5 Pro patches and haven't always had great things to say about them. But the biggest offender by far seems to be Silent Hill 2 Remake, which there was a lot of confusion over whether when that PS5 Pro patch was even going live. Then it did go live, and people realized very quickly that it just wasn't as good in many cases as even the base model version, where you got fidelity and performance mode. However, Alan Wake 2 seems to have a lot of inconsistencies as well, and according to the Digital Foundry video, Star Wars Jedi Survivor also isn't shaping up all that well. Like, in many cases, it's not like they're complete disasters, it's just that when they fix a lot of things, they seem to be breaking a lot of other stuff in the process that wasn't necessarily broken on the original versions. Now, there is a reason for this that keeps cropping up, but overall, it's not the best look, and it's always going to be on individual developers to implement this stuff properly. But it makes you wonder, how much time did they have with the tech? Is this going to be indicative going forward of optimizing for a bunch of different consoles? You know, we already live in an era where you're optimizing for PS5, Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S, sometimes old-gen consoles, and then obviously you've got PC on top. Like, hopefully this won't be indicative of the future of PS5 Pro optimization, but when some of your biggest titles outside of the first-party space aren't quite cutting it's just, as someone who bought one, man, even at half price it's very disappointing to get the machine, get the patches, and then have to wait for those patches to be fixed.
There's things like, it's not death by 1,000 cuts, but there are 1,000 cuts coming at it. I feel like for the most part, it's able to deflect most of them. But I get because I'm just like, we mentioned this quite a lot, like you said on the podcast, which people should go subscribe to if you're not already. But that idea of just wanting to have the best version of a game, best version of a console, best version of the time you're spending gaming. And I'm a big person who'll just pay for a problem to go away if you give me a specific amount of money. And in this case, I realized that did then have a limit, because I was like, I'm not spending £700 on this thing for a better frame rate or a slightly higher resolution. And then as the more days have gone by, certain comparisons have looked pretty good, other ones have looked worse, and it just feels like every other day there's a new reason not to get a PlayStation 5 Pro. And most of the coverage is like, okay, there are some differences, but it does take zooming in to find them or whatever. But then you do have elements like this where, depending on how the game was built in the first place, like you said, the first party output's better, like, you know, Spidey 2 or Ratchet and Clank or whatever it is. But a lot of the third party stuff, I wonder how much Sony just thought that their PSSR, like auto upscaling tech, would take care of everything, because the results are mixed as hell. Like, certain 2D games look better, they look crisper, some of the text looks a bit clearer, and then other stuff, some third parties, people like Digital Foundry going all the way back to the original Destiny, or just any game that might have more bloom lighting, something that's a bit less, certain things that are rendered more atmospherically. I guess that's why Silent Hill 2 falls into that bracket to a degree as well, where everything's just really blurry. It just makes everything look worse, and Jedi Survivor has that as well. Apparently Dragon Age does as well, but everything is all per mode based as well, because we still haven't got away from quality modes, performance modes. You just have quality pro, performance pro, whatever, and that's a shame. Like, if I was someone who forked out this much money, and it's very much the enthusiast side of things, I just want everything to work, and maybe we'll get there with the teething issues, but like you said, I have to imagine that, I mean, there was no way that Sony were going to give every single studio a PlayStation 5 Pro to really get it right, and so now that everything's out, you're kind of just seeing the breadth of titles that aren't supported, because you were never going to get there anyway, and there wasn't as much of a a focused push as they would have been towards the PlayStation 5 launch or something. But still, you know, there are examples of some studios that have been knocking it out the park, like Hello Games with No Man's Sky. It's like 8K, 120 frames a second. Game looks absolutely incredible, but sadly that's not the norm.
No, that's exactly right. And yeah, it is frustrating because I don't really know who to blame necessarily because, you know, it's obviously on the developers themselves to make sure they're putting those patches out in the most optimum ways. But then you have to question, like I said before, like how much cooperation have they had with Sony? How much time have they had to put these patches out? Should they have been delayed a little bit, you know, to make sure they were 100% solid before they were pushed out? I think, like you said there, from what I can gather, and again, I'm pretty much a layman when it comes to the exact terms and the exact technicalities. But even when I was like playing these games, like visually, you can tell that there's something off. It's not like necessarily you have to dig into the background of everything. Sometimes you do, and that is what Digital Foundry is so good at doing. But sometimes it is just evident when you're looking at a moving image or you're moving the camera around that the flicker, especially, that seems to be caused by the PSSR, that is really distracting, even in some games where it is implemented quite well, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, from what I can gather from the articles that I've read, from the many Digital Foundry videos I have watched, it seems to be the fact that it is Sony's new feature, that mode that I just mentioned, that upscales the native resolution and kind of outputs things at a crisper sort of a pixel count, as it were. Like, that seems to be what's causing the problems, and I guess that is kind of to be expected because this is like bespoke technology and the developers aren't going to have like full grasp on it straight away. But like you said, like at 700 quid, I want more than just excuses. I want more than just, oh, it'll be fixed eventually. I can't remember who posted this. It was just a comment that I saw on one of the Digital Foundry videos, but someone essentially just said, I'm so pleased for all of the PS5 Pro early adopters testing out in beta testing PSSR for the PS6 launch, and that's kind of how it feels right now. But you know, though these are a handful of games, I will say I've still really enjoyed my time with it overall, because even when it's not working fully, like I haven't watched the Dragon Age video, but I know that's, like you said, in the write-ups, that's been regarded as one of the ones that doesn't have necessarily incredible implementation. But I played the back third of that game on PS5 Pro, and yeah, while it's not perfect, it is still a noticeable increase over the base version. It still has some issues here and there, but if I was to recommend one over the other, it would be the PS5 Pro version every time there. So there are still tangible positives. I guess it's just overall not as good as it could have been or as we were expecting, which is a shame, because I just wanted to play Alan Wake 2 again, man. Like, that was the one that sold it to me, and it's what a shame.
There are so many games like that where I'm just like, okay, Alan Wake's DLC looks incredible. Let me get the Pro, let me get the best version of this. And then I think that nearly every day at the minute, every hour of every day, I'm like, actually, might as well get a Pro and play the best version of this thing. And like I said, something else always keeps getting in the way of it. The PS6 conversation is really interesting because, Sony have already talked about that thing anyway. But this is only the second modular half-step console they've done. Obviously, the first one being the PlayStation 4 Pro. And that idea of bringing in technology like software-based upscaling, like the PSSR, which I'm forgetting exactly what that stands for, PlayStation Super Sampling something. But you're getting a lot of software-based upscaling. The next Nintendo Switch is rumored to have that as well, as a way of getting, maybe underpowered hardware as a way to try and compete with the bigger consoles or the more impressive visuals or whatever it is. You do all that stuff on the rendering side instead, and that can boost the frame rates and boost the resolutions. As a layman's way to put it, which is like I was saying, what we both are. But that seems to be a solution to something the industry struggled with for a while. And this is one of the first major implementations of that. I think that's why they're charging so much money for it. And even when they did the reveal, they were like, oh, it's AI-powered upscaling. And it's like, you guys barely understand, like, the nomenclature of this is like barely clear at all. Like, what artificial intelligence is there thinking its way through this? Like, you can't call it that. But the industry is definitely steering towards the general idea of software-based upscaling, which when it works will look incredible.
Yeah.
But these are the teething issues that get there, and the price point associated with getting there straight away. Like, the Apple VR headset thing that was like £8,000 or whatever. Like, you're paying a premium to have that first experience of what will eventually be regular tech. But it's going to take a while to get there. And I agree with you. Like, it's just a shame. Like, at some point, I just can't get away from the brass tacks reality of you're asking for a stupid amount of money for something that doesn't work.
100%. You know, I almost kind of just want to stop it there, I suppose. You know, like you mentioned that idea of, you know, having this kind of AI upscaling technology. And I will say, like, that has always been there to a degree. Like, even one of the biggest PS4 Pro selling points was that you can output now in 4K, but not everything was native 4K. That was using, you know, checkerboarding to get a 4K display going. Even that's the case on the regular PS5, but it's definitely a case where the Pro consoles always tease what you're going to get in the future. And it's interesting, I think, to see how extremely incremental those upgrades are now, because it's like, okay, we've got the PS5 original and that does ray tracing, but it doesn't do good ray tracing. So you get the PS5 Pro and that does better ray tracing, but it still doesn't do PC ray tracing. It still doesn't come near those levels.
We're talking about the shades of light as well. Like,
and I like that stuff. I do. You know, I'm playing through Spider-Man Miles Morales again, and I will go back through Spider-Man 2 as well, and I'm like, I love being able to get this detail in 60 frames per second. I love the added lighting depth on Dragon Age Veilguard, but for 700 quid and for, I don't know, I know this isn't necessarily for the average person, but like going forward, when does it just get like diminishing returns on that stuff where you're pushing these machines to the absolute max and you're getting better results that, you know, like the tech heads can notice, but that the normal person is going to say, well, it's just a bit more shadow, isn't it, you know?
Well, yeah, and that's mostly been my response to it, has been like trying to tell the difference and trying to zoom in. Short of just getting a magnifying glass, like most of the quality to performance modes don't make that much of a difference to me either, unless there's something really egregious like a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But yeah, that whole idea of like trying to wow the average consumer, I feel like the general response, at least in that regard of that part of the conversation, hasn't been there for the Pro. It's been a lot of like, yeah, it's there if you want it, if you're an enthusiast, you have that much money, whatever. Which is fine. Maybe that's all they wanted it to be. If it is an R&D project, then it's like, okay, we'll put out the version of this that we have so far and just see how the market responds to it. But it's all roads lead to the PlayStation 6 anyway. Yeah. It's not unlike the Switch OLED, which just felt like, you know, you had all the leakers, the Jason Schreier's talking about the Nintendo Switch 2 being in production a good few years ago, and the only thing that came out of that was the OLED screen was the only thing that changed on the base model Switch, and then they sold that, and it's like the next Switch assumedly will have an OLED screen and we'll go forward with that. But yeah, this is a modular console in every possible way, but the early access thing is hilarious to tag onto it.
Yeah.
Where we're in an industry where not only do we get games that feel like early access, labeled or otherwise, but now the consoles are in early access as well.
So Sony have become comfortable with selling you a promise rather than something you can experience right now. And in some ways, like I look, like it was the same with the PSVR 2, and I love the PSVR 2. Honestly, I think if you're thinking about getting a PlayStation 5 Pro or a PSVR 2, get the PSVR 2. You're going to get those like unique, bespoke experiences that you can't get anywhere else. Whereas with the PS5 Pro, you're just going to get slightly better versions of the games that you already play if you want a PS5. But what I mean by that is, right now, there isn't really anything that fully wows you with the technology. There are a lot of great games. There are a lot of great games that benefit, but they're all older games, usually, especially in the first-party space. Like, the best first-party PS5 Pro games that, don't get me wrong, do wow you, are, like, really, really good, are the Insomniac titles, you know? But even Spider-Man 2, at this point, is, like, a year old and, you know, wasn't, I don't think anyway, like built with the PS5 Pro dev kit. So you have nothing brand new that's coming out that really makes the most of the technology. We won't see that for a little while yet. Probably something like Ghost of Yote next year, you know, at least from the first party space. So that's kind of made it difficult, because it's like, okay, what I've got now is good, but where are we going with this? How much is this going to be utilized? And again, I'm happy to spend 360 quid on that, but if I had paid 700, I think I'd be in a hole right now, head in my hands.
I think they really struggle to be like, what? Because even now you can't answer the question of what is a PlayStation 4 Pro game and what is a PlayStation 5 Pro game. And they would argue that they don't necessarily need an answer to that. It's more just, the options are there if you want them. But it is interesting to sort of round this out and look into the future, like the idea of like, okay, should I future-proof myself, get one of these for the best version of GTA 6 when something like GTA 6 has been in, 90% of its development was before the 5 Pro was even available. Is the best possible scenario just an extra option on the graphics menu? Like, it's not going to be something that's fundamentally geared towards this, because it can't be. Whether that's development so far or something going into development where you're just not going to target this thing entirely because most people don't have them. I've kept an eye on Argos in the UK, and the PlayStation 5 Pro has remained in stock the entire time. They've really the whole system seems to have struggled to catch on, and that's before you mention the disk drive stuff as well.
Yeah.
Which even if you tag one of them on, they go for like £140 in the UK, which is crazy, really, to be able to access titles that you already had. But yeah, I think they're up against all of that going forward. And then it's like, what does the PS6 look like? What does the PlayStation 6 be? What does it get priced at?
Yeah.
Like, if $700 for a modular console is what we're going with, is the PS6 just £1,000 or $1,000? And they just hope people pay it.
This is what I keep thinking, right? Because I for as much as I've kind of criticized it, now I am happy with it. I think it's a good bit of kit. For my tastes, it does exactly what I want by bumping up the likes of ray tracing and fidelity modes, or melding the quality modes from PS5 games with the performance mode, so you get like those higher frame rates and whatnot. That is what I've bought it for. Mm-hmm. But unless you kind of have a game that you're really wanting to maximize right now, I would say wait. But even then, if I said wait until Ghost of Yotei, are we then only a couple of years away from the PS6? Would it be crazy to then, as the first party Sony portfolio starts running out, like if you buy into a PlayStation 5 Pro for £700, will that only last you 2 or 3 years, until the PS6 comes out? It's a lot. I don't know. It's a lot of money, and I think it very much is a luxury item. It very much is for enthusiasts, and I get that. Only about probably 10% of every PlayStation 5 owner is going to end up getting a Pro in the grand scheme of things, but it's just interesting, like you said, with the marketing, whether this establishes norms for the next generation. And to me, it's another thing that's indicative of Sony having no real competition right now, and they can just kind of do whatever they want.
I think as well, it's interesting being like, they're making an enthusiast version of a console just for the people with that much more disposable income, or they want to spend it on that or whatever. But then to bring it all the way back to the beginning of the whole video, you're not executing on that promise either, when so many titles that have just come out don't run very well, like a Silent Hill 2 or Alan Wake's DLC or whatever. You need to do right by those customers. Otherwise, if you lose those people, then you can't even do your cash-in half-step thing either. So we'll keep an eye on it. Hopefully the PlayStation 5 Pro gets there.